The first time I saw a blue streetlight, I was 4 blocks from home. It was 11:47 on a Tuesday night, middle of November, and I was driving east on Brighton Road with the window cracked because the heat in my car only works if you let some cold air in to balance it out. I'd just finished my shift. My eyes were tired in that specific way they get after 8 hours on screens. Not sleepy, just flat, like the muscles behind them had given up adjusting. The light was on the southwest corner of Brighton and Ohio Avenue. An ordinary sodium vapor street lamp, the same kind Columbus mounts on every residential stretch. Tall, slightly angled arm, that familiar amber glow that turns everything beneath it the color of weak tea. Except it was blue. Not a deep blue, not the pulsing blue of a police cruiser or the sharp blue of a welder's arc. A pale, clean, almost clinical blue, like a phone screen left on in a dark room. It changed the pavement under it, made it look like a different material entirely, made the parked cars beneath it look like they were resting on the floor of a shallow pool. I pulled over, let the car drift to the curb about 30 feet past the intersection, shifted into park, looked back over my left shoulder through the rear window. Yellow. The light was yellow. Same amber sodium orange it had been every night for the 2 years I'd lived in this neighborhood. I adjusted the side mirror, still yellow in the reflection. Then I turned my head forward, looked through the windshield at nothing in particular, and let my focus go soft. In the leftmost margin of my peripheral vision, that dissolving edge where detail becomes impression, the light was blue, unmistakably, the color of something that had no business being on that corner. I sat in the car for 11 minutes. I know the exact duration because I watched the dashboard clock the entire time. I didn't look at the light again. When the clock hit 11:58, I put the car in drive, pulled away from the curb, and covered the remaining 2 blocks to my driveway at about 15 miles an hour. I went inside, drank a glass of water at the kitchen sink without turning on the light. Then I went to bed. That was week 6. I need to go back to the beginning to explain how I ended up watching a clock in a parked car on a Tuesday night, afraid to look at a streetlight. My name is Nora Elin. I'm 34 years old. I live alone in a rented half-double in the Old Town East neighborhood of Columbus, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where every third house has been beautifully restored with historically appropriate paint colors and a little placard by the door, and every third house is quietly rotting from the porch inward, and the remaining third are somewhere in between, held together by landlord indifference and tenant stubbornness. My half is in the middle category. The bones are fine, the windows are drafty, the rent is reasonable for what it is. I moved to Columbus in 2021 from a smaller place downstate. Before that, I'd spent 3 years working as a zoning compliance clerk for a county auditor's office. The kind of position where you spend most of your day cross-referencing parcel maps against permit filings, checking setback distances, and drafting politely threatening letters to homeowners who poured a concrete pad 6 inches into the utility easement. It was not exciting work. I was good at it. Not inspired, not passionate, just accurate. I had a knack for noticing when things didn't line up. A property boundary that didn't match the tax map. A building footprint that was 4 feet wider on the aerial photo than it was in the permit application. Small discrepancies. The kind of things that seem meaningless until they compound. I left that job in early 2024. The reasons were mundane. A change in county administration, a gap in health insurance during the transition, a new administrator who made it clear my position was being restructured in a direction that happened to fit his nephew's resume. I wasn't fired. I was dissolved. The position continued to exist. I just wasn't in it anymore. I spent the summer doing temp work in Columbus, data entry, filing, some light bookkeeping for a property management company. The kind of work where the primary skill required is the ability to sit still for 8 hours. I was getting by. I wasn't thriving. In the second week of September 2024, I found a job listing on an employment aggregation site I'd never used before. I don't even remember how I landed on the site. Probably a search result I followed 3 clicks deep without paying attention. The listing was titled Municipal Visual Compliance Monitor, Columbus Metro Area. The description was sparse. Ongoing private contract supporting municipal infrastructure assessment, monitoring and logging visual feeds of designated urban zones, evening shift, 5 nights per week, Sunday through Thursday, 3 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., competitive compensation. The pay was listed as $31.50 an hour. For a monitoring job with no degree requirement, no clearance, and no specialized certification, that number didn't make sense. I applied anyway, mostly because I'd learned that the jobs with slightly unusual descriptions and slightly unusual pay were sometimes the most tolerable ones. Niche contracts with specific needs and no interest in micromanaging the person who filled them. I expected to never hear back. I heard back in 14 hours. The reply came from an address at CoralineInfrastructure.com. It was professional, brief, and included a time and location for an in-person interview the following Wednesday afternoon. The office was on the second floor of a mixed-use building on North 4th Street, near the convention center. A building I'd driven past dozens of times without ever looking above the ground floor. The other tenants were a dentist's office and a State Farm insurance agent. The Coraline suite was 2 rooms, a front office that was clean but generic, desk, 2 chairs, a water cooler, no signage, and a back room with a closed door. The man who interviewed me was named Dale Pressick. He was somewhere in his late 40s, stocky, with close-cut gray hair and the manner of someone who'd spent a career managing municipal projects and had stopped being impressed by anything. He asked about my background in zoning. He asked whether I was comfortable working alone for extended periods. He asked whether I had reliable transportation. He did not ask whether I had any experience with surveillance systems, visual monitoring, data feeds, or anything technical. He told me the job was straightforward. I would sit in a monitoring room, observe 16 live video feeds of urban areas, and log any deviations I noticed from what he called baseline visual parameters. He said the feeds were part of an ongoing infrastructure assessment contract with a municipal client he wasn't authorized to name. He said training would be minimal because the observation work was intuitive. I would be looking for things that appeared different from one shift to the next. Changes in structures, street conditions, signage, lighting, traffic patterns, anything that deviated from the established visual record. I asked what the baseline was. He said it would become apparent through exposure. I asked who I'd be working with. He said there was a second monitor on an overlapping shift, but we wouldn't share the room. Different schedules, different feed assignments. I asked about the back room. He said that was the monitoring suite. He offered me the position at the end of the interview. I started the following Monday. The monitoring room was smaller than I expected, and darker. No windows. The walls were painted a flat charcoal gray. The floor was commercial-grade carpet tile in a color I'd describe as institutional nothing. Against the far wall, a long desk held 16 monitors arranged in 2 rows of 8, each about 22 inches, each showing a different live feed. The feeds were high-resolution, color, shot from slightly elevated fixed positions, rooftop level, maybe 4 or 5 stories up. Each screen had a small label in the lower right corner, F01 through F16. There was one chair, an adjustable office chair with decent lumbar support, which, given the 8.5-hour shifts, was the single most important piece of equipment in the room. There was a desk lamp with a dim setting. There was a desktop computer on a smaller side table with a proprietary logging application open, a simple interface with fields for feed number, timestamp, deviation type, and a free text description box. No internet access on the machine. No email, just the logging app and a file manager showing one folder labeled Archive. Dale spent about 40 minutes walking me through the system on my first day. Each feed showed a different section of an urban area. The streets were real, paved, lined, with curbs and sidewalks and fire hydrants and crosswalks. The buildings were real. Brick, concrete, wood frame, steel and glass, the whole mixed-era architectural vocabulary of a mid-sized American city. There were cars parked along the curbs. There were traffic signals. There were buses. There was weather. The feeds showed clouds, rain, shadows moving with the sun during the early part of my shift, and darkness with artificial lighting for the last few hours. It looked like Columbus. It wasn't Columbus. I knew this within the first 15 minutes, and I knew it the way you know a familiar face has been subtly altered in a photograph. The river was there, a wide, slow-moving waterway that appeared in feeds 4, 9, and 13 at various points. It curved roughly the way the Scioto curves through downtown. The general street grid was right. The north-south, east-west orientation, the way the blocks compressed near the river and loosened toward the east side. The scale felt correct. But the buildings were wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not fantasy architecture wrong. Wrong the way a city is wrong when you're in a part of it you've never visited and you keep thinking you're about to reach a landmark that never appears. Feed 1 showed what looked like a commercial corridor with 2-story brick buildings, maybe a main street of some kind, but the storefronts didn't match anything on High Street or Parsons or any of Columbus's commercial strips I knew. Feed 6 showed a residential neighborhood with mature trees and wide setbacks that could have been Upper Arlington or Bexley, but the house styles were slightly off-arid details from the 1920s mixed with proportions from the 1960s in combinations no architect would have drawn on purpose. And the light was different. Not the quality of the camera feed, the actual light in the city. The sodium vapor street lamps were a slightly cooler amber than the ones I saw on my drive home. The traffic signals were the right colors, but the green had a faint blue undertone, like a lens filter no one had adjusted. The sunlight during the first 2 hours of my shift moved at the correct angle for mid-September in central Ohio, but the shadows it cast were about 10% too long, as if the sun were consistently a degree or two lower than it should have been. I asked Dale on that first day where the feeds were coming from. He said, "The designated monitoring zone. I asked where the monitoring zone was. He said, "That's defined by the contract. Your job is the feeds." I didn't push it. The pay was $31.50 an hour. The room was quiet. The work was simple. I logged 4 deviations on my first shift. A traffic signal timing change on feed 3. A new piece of plywood covering a window on feed 11. A parked vehicle that appeared between 2 frames on feed 7 with no corresponding movement, and a streetlight outage on feed 15. I typed my descriptions into the logging fields, saved each entry, and drove home at 11:35 p.m. For the first 3 weeks, that was the job. I want to be precise about those early weeks, because what happened later makes it tempting to rewrite them as ominous, and they weren't. They were mundane. I drove to the building on North 4th Street. I let myself in with the key card Dale had given me. I walked up to the 2nd floor, past the dentist's office that was always closed by 3 p.m., and the State Farm office where a woman named Patrice was sometimes still on the phone. I entered the Coraline suite. I entered the monitoring room. I sat down. I watched 16 screens for 8.5 hours. I logged deviations. I drove home. The deviations were, for the most part, banal. Infrastructure changes. A pothole appearing on feed 2, a crosswalk being repainted on feed 10. Weather effects. Standing water after rain, a tree limb down on feed 8. Lighting changes, bulbs cycling, timers shifting as the season changed and the days shortened, vehicle and pedestrian activity, though this was lighter than you'd expect for a city the size of what was on the screens. I saw people on the feeds. They walked. They stood at bus stops. They carried groceries. But there were fewer of them than there should have been for the density of the housing stock I was looking at. It felt like a city at 60% occupancy. I logged between 3 and 15 deviations per shift. The logging app stamped each entry with a time and auto-assigned a deviation code from a drop-down menu. Structural, atmospheric, vehicular, pedestrian, illumination, signage, environmental. There was one additional category at the bottom of the drop-down that I noticed on my second day but never used. It was labeled Convergence, Field/Feed. I asked Dale about it during one of his infrequent check-ins. He came by the suite every 3 or 4 days, usually for less than 10 minutes. "That's for overlap observations," he said. "If you see something on the feed that directly corresponds to something in the physical field zone." "What's the physical field zone?" "Your commute, your daily movement area. If you see something on a feed that matches something you see in person, outside of work, you flag it as convergence." "Has that happened before?" "It's in the drop-down for a reason." That was the end of the conversation. He left. I went back to the feeds. I want to say I thought about that exchange for days, but I didn't. I filed it away the way you file away any slightly unusual workplace instruction when the paycheck clears reliably. I assumed convergence meant something technical. Maybe the feeds occasionally pulled reference imagery from public sources, Google Street View or municipal traffic cams, and if I spotted a frame bleed, I was supposed to flag it. Made enough sense. I didn't think about it again for 2 weeks. The first convergence happened on feed 7. Week 4, a Wednesday night. I was scanning the feeds in my usual pattern. A slow sweep from 1 to 16, 10 to 15 seconds per screen, then back, then focused attention on any feed where I'd noticed movement or change. Feed 7 showed a section of residential street with a sidewalk on the south side, a row of older homes set back from the road, and a low retaining wall running along the front of a property on the east end of the frame. The retaining wall had a crack, a long, jagged fracture running diagonally from the top course of concrete block down about 4 feet to where it met the sidewalk. The crack was distinctive. It branched near the midpoint into 2 parallel fissures that ran about 8 inches apart before reconverging, like a river splitting around an island. I recognized it, not from the feeds, from my commute. There was a retaining wall on East Broad Street, about 2 miles from my apartment, that I passed every single morning on my way to get coffee before my shift. I'd been looking at that wall for 2 years without really seeing it, the way you stop seeing anything you pass often enough. But the crack was there. I knew it. The island-shaped split, the diagonal descent, the slight lean of the top course above the fracture where the block had shifted half an inch. The one on Feed 7 was the same crack, same shape, same branching, same location on the wall relative to the sidewalk. But it was longer. The crack on the feed extended about 3 inches farther at the bottom than the one I remembered. I didn't log it that night. I wanted to look at the real wall first. The next morning, I drove to East Broad, slowed down, and pulled over across the street from the property. I took 3 photographs on my phone. The crack was there. The branching was there. I compared the photos to my memory of the feed image. The shape matched. The scale matched. Everything matched. Except the length. The real crack was shorter, about 3 inches shorter at the bottom, exactly as I'd estimated from the feed. I sat in the car and thought about this. The conclusion I wanted to reach was that this was a coincidence. Cracks in retaining walls follow the logic of the material. The block type, the mortar mix, the soil pressure, the frost cycles. 2 walls of similar construction in similar soil conditions could plausibly develop similar fracture patterns. The 3-inch discrepancy was easily explained by different ages or different load conditions. The conclusion I actually reached was different. The branching pattern, the island shape, was too specific. It wasn't just a similar crack. It was the same crack on a wall that was in every other respect a different wall, on a different street, in a different city that I wasn't supposed to be able to compare it to, because I wasn't supposed to know where the feeds were coming from. I logged it that evening, selected Convergence, field/feed from the drop-down, typed a description, noted the location of the real wall, submitted the entry. Dale came by 2 days later. He didn't mention the convergence log. He talked about a schedule change for Thanksgiving week. He asked if the feeds were clear. He said the client was satisfied with the volume and specificity of my deviation reports. I asked, "Does the system ever import reference imagery? Street view, or traffic cams, anything like that?" "No," he said. "The feeds are source native." What does that mean? They originate in the monitoring zone. They're not composited. Then how would convergence happen? How would something on the feed match something on my commute? Dale looked at me with an expression I'd later come to think of as practiced patience. The face of a man who had given this answer before. "That's what the category is for," he said, "so we can track the frequency." He left. I opened the archive folder on the desktop for the first time. The archive contained deviation logs from every previous monitor. 7 people had held the position before me. Their logs were organized by employee ID. No names, just alphanumeric strings and date range. The earliest was from 2019. The most recent was from the spring of 2024, about 5 months before I'd started. I spent 3 shifts reading through them. The pattern was so consistent that by the 3rd set of logs I could predict the entries before I read them. Each monitor's first 3 weeks produced generic, infrastructure-level deviations: potholes, light outages, vehicle activity, weather effects, normal monitoring work. Weeks 4 through 6 is where things changed. The logs became more specific, more comparative. Monitors started noting similarities between feed imagery and real Columbus locations. One wrote, "Feed 4, 1420 timestamp. Bridge railing damage pattern is identical to condition noted on Rich Street Bridge, East Approach. Scale differs by approximately 5%. Another, Feed 11. Storefront signage uses font and color scheme identical to business at 1488 Parsons Avenue. Business name differs. Layout identical. The convergence entries increased in every monitor's record from weeks 4 through 6, then stopped abruptly. Not tapered, stopped. The final entry for each monitor was a standard deviation log. Weather, infrastructure, illumination, no convergence, no commentary. And then nothing. No exit notes, no transition logs, no forwarding comments. 7 monitors, same arc, same silence at the end. I looked for anything personal. Margin notes, saved files, unofficial documents. The system was clean, but when I pulled open the shallow center drawer of the desk to look for a pen, I found something the archive didn't contain. A handwritten note on a torn piece of yellow legal paper, folded once. The handwriting was angular, male-presenting, pressing hard enough to leave grooves in the paper. It read, "Count the streetlights on your way home. If the number changes, tell someone who doesn't work here." No name, no date, no further instruction. I put the note back in the drawer. I finished my shift. I drove home. I counted the streetlights. Bryden Road, from the turnoff East Main to my driveway, is a straight east-west residential street, about 3/4 of a mile long. The streetlights are evenly spaced on the south side, with a few additional ones at intersections. I'd driven this stretch 5 nights a week for 6 weeks and never counted them. That first night, 41. The next night I counted again, 41. I felt foolish. I felt like a person who'd let a note in a drawer do exactly what a note in a drawer is supposed to do: make you paranoid. The third night, 43. I slowed down. I counted again from the start of the stretch, keeping my eyes on the south side, touching my thumb to each finger as I passed each light. 43. I turned around at my driveway, drove back to East Main, and counted a third time. 43. I went home and opened Google Street View on my phone, pulled up Bryden Road. The imagery was from summer full-leaf canopy, bright daylight, and I scrolled the length of the street, tapping each visible streetlight pole. Some were obscured by trees. I counted what I could see clearly. 39. 4 possibilities. The street view imagery was outdated and new lights had been added. The street view imagery was correct and I was miscounting in the dark. The count had actually changed between nights and I was losing my grip on something basic. Or the street I was driving on was not entirely the street that Google had photographed. I went with the first explanation. It was the only one that didn't require me to question either my counting ability or the physical stability of a public road. But I kept counting, every night, for 2 weeks. The count went 43, 43, 43, 43, 43, 41, 43, 43, 43, 43, 44, 43, 43, 44. The drops bothered me. The gains bothered me more. In week 7 I did something I probably should have done in week 5. I looked up the previous monitors. The archive gave me only employee IDs, not names, but each ID followed a format that included a date string, what appeared to be a start date. I cross-referenced these with the rough employment timeline I'd inferred from the log dates and searched LinkedIn, Indeed, and a few public records databases for anyone in the Columbus area who'd listed Coraline Infrastructure Partners as an employer. I found one. Glenn Borovich, age 41, listed a 9-week contract with Coraline on his LinkedIn under a bland title, Infrastructure Monitoring Specialist. He was the 7th monitor. His log dates matched the spring 2024 range. His current location was listed as Dayton. I sent him a message, polite, vague, professional. I said I was currently in the role he'd held and wanted to ask a few questions about the position. I expected the same silence I'd gotten used to from every other part of this job. He replied within the hour. He said he'd meet me in person. He named a coffee shop in Dayton. He said not to mention the company name in any further messages. I drove to Dayton on my day off. It's about 70 miles, straight west on I-70. Glenn was already at the coffee shop when I arrived. A tall man, thin in a way that looked recent, with dark circles under his eyes and a travel mug he'd brought from home. He didn't order anything. He sat across from me in a corner booth and waited for me to talk first. I told him about the feeds. He nodded. I told him about the convergence entries. He nodded. I told him about the retaining wall crack. He closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them. You're in the overlap phase, he said. The what? Weeks 4 through 7. That's when you start seeing it on your side. The shared details, the match points. Dale said the system might import reference imagery. Dale says a lot of things that are technically not lies. The feeds are source native. He's right about that. They come from the zone. The zone is real. It's a real place. Where? Glenn looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not fear, not pity, something closer to recognition, like he was looking at a photograph he'd seen before. The city on the feeds is called Elsa, he said. I waited. It's not a code name. It's not an acronym. That's what the internal handover packet called it. The city of Elsie. I don't know if that's an official name or a placeholder that stuck. I found it in a document Dale gave me during my first week. A single-page orientation sheet that I'm guessing you didn't receive because they stopped giving it out after Monitor 5 had some kind of episode. What kind of episode? I don't know. I know they changed the onboarding after that. Less information up front. More observation-based learning. He paused. What do you know about the blue streetlights? Something moved in my chest. Not quite fear. More like the feeling of a key turning in a lock you didn't know was there. I've seen one, I said. On my street, last week. It was blue in my peripheral vision and yellow when I looked directly at it. Glenn set his travel mug down. That's how it starts. Periphery first. Then it holds for a few seconds when you look at it. Then it just stays. What does it mean? It means that particular light is from Elsa. Not a copy of it, not a twin. The actual light. It's been placed there, or it's grown there, or the street has changed around it, and the light was always there, and the one you remember was the temporary one. I don't know the mechanism. I know the result. And the result is what? The result is that part of your street is now part of Elsa. Physically, geographically, one streetlight at a time. I sat with that for a while. The coffee shop was busy. Normal Dayton Saturday morning. Families, students, a man arguing quietly with a laptop. I let the noise hold me. "Why did you leave?" I asked. "I saw my apartment on feed 12. He said this without drama, like a man reporting a plumbing issue. "My building, my unit. 3rd floor, 2nd window from the left. The light was on. It was 9:40 p.m. on a Wednesday, and I was sitting in the monitoring room on North 4th Street, looking at a live feed of my own lit window from a camera that was supposedly in a different city. I watched for 20 minutes. At 10:02, the light in the window turned off. I called my apartment from my cell phone. Obviously, no one answered. I drove home. The light in my apartment was on. It had been on all night. My lamp was on a timer. So it could have been a coincidence, sure. Except the window frame in the feed had a hairline crack in the upper left corner that my actual window had developed 2 months earlier, and I'd filled it with caulk that left a visible residue mark, and that mark was visible on the feed. I didn't say anything. I gave notice the next day, moved to Dayton 3 days later. Different city, different grid, no feeds. And the streetlight count on my block in Dayton has been stable, 17, every night for 5 months. He paused. How many are on yours? 43, as of last night. He shook his head slowly. When I left Columbus, Bryden Road had 41. I drove back to Columbus that afternoon on I-70, and the drive felt different, not longer or shorter, just different in a way I want to be precise about. The highway was the same highway. The exits were the same exits. The billboards were the same billboards. But I was aware for the first time of the assumption underneath all of it. The assumption that the road I was driving on connected to the city I was driving toward, and that the city I was driving toward was the same city I'd left that morning. I'd never questioned it before, because there had never been a reason to. You drive to Columbus. You arrive in Columbus. The name on the sign matches the name in your head matches the place on the ground. But what if it didn't? Not dramatically. Not a different city, not a portal, not a movie. What if it was 98% Columbus and 2% something else, and the 2% was growing, and the signs still said Columbus because the signs hadn't caught up yet? I got home at 4:30 p.m. I had the night off. I spent it doing something I want to describe carefully because it became the foundation for everything that followed. I made a map. Not the kind you're thinking of, not a conspiracy board with string and push pins, a quiet, methodical comparison map, the kind I used to make at the auditor's office when a property boundary was in dispute and you needed to overlay the tax map, the survey plat, the aerial photograph, and the physical site conditions to find where they disagreed. I printed screenshots from every feed, 16 shots, one per screen, taken from a sequence I'd captured on my phone during my last shift. Then I pulled up Google Maps, Google Street View, and the Franklin County Auditor's GIS Parcel Viewer. I went feed by feed and tried to find the real Columbus location that most closely matched each camera angle. For most feeds, I couldn't. The architecture was wrong. The street widths were wrong. The building density didn't match any neighborhood I could find. These feeds showed a city that felt like Columbus, but wasn't close enough to pin down. But for 5 feeds, F4, F7, F9, F12, and F15, I found matches. Not perfect matches, close matches, close enough that the discrepancies were measurable. Feed 4 matched a section of the Scioto riverfront nearby Centennial Park, but the pedestrian bridge in the feed was about 40 feet downstream from where the real one stood, and it had a different railing design. Feed 7 matched the East Broad Street block, where I'd identified the retaining wall crack. Feed 9 matched a stretch of Cleveland Avenue on the north side, but with 2 additional buildings that didn't exist in real Columbus. 1, a narrow 3-story walk-up. 1, a low-slung commercial structure with no signage. Feed 12 matched. And this made the skin on my arms tighten. Glenn Borovich's former apartment building on East Long Street. I confirmed this with the auditor's GIS viewer. The parcel shape, the building footprint, even the setback from the sidewalk, all consistent. Except the building in the feed had an extra half-story, a raised basement level visible above grade that the real building didn't have. Feed 15 matched my own block of Bryden Road. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the 5 match points plotted on the city map. They weren't random. They weren't clustered. They formed a route, a continuous path through the city that connected, in order, Feed 4 Riverfront, Feed 7 East Broad, Feed 9 Cleveland Avenue, Feed 12 East Long, Feed 15 Bryden Road, my street. The path between them was roughly the same path I drove between home and work every day, plus a few detours. There were 3 additional points on the path where the feeds didn't show me a match to any location I knew. 3 points in real Columbus that sat along the route but had no corresponding feed imagery. I marked them on the map. I visited the 3 unmarked points the next morning. The first was an empty lot on Oak Street, just east of I-71. Gravel, weeds, a chain-link fence with a no-dumping sign. Nothing notable. The parcel records showed it had been vacant since 2017 when a warehouse on the site was demolished. The second was an empty lot on Hamilton Avenue, a few blocks north. Same condition. Vacant, fenced, unremarkable. Demolished residential structure, 2019. The third point was on Miller Avenue, on the Near East Side. It was not an empty lot. There was a building there, a narrow 2-story commercial structure with a flat roof, beige brick facade, and a recessed entrance with a glass door. No signage, no business name. The windows on the second floor were covered from the inside with what looked like brown paper. The building was set between a laundromat and a tax preparation office, both open, both ordinary. I had driven down Miller Avenue at least 20 times since I'd moved to this neighborhood. This building had not been there. I know how that sounds. I know that human memory for streetscapes is unreliable, that we filter out buildings we have no reason to notice, that a plain 2-story structure on a commercial block could easily go unregistered in the mind of someone who had no business there. I know all of that. But I had worked in zoning compliance. I had spent 3 years learning to notice buildings, their setbacks, their footprints, their relationship to the parcel boundaries and the sidewalk and the street. I had the professional habit of looking at structures with the part of my brain that measures, and this building had not been there. I parked. I sat in the car for a few minutes. Then I got out and walked to the entrance. The glass door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into a small vestibule with a concrete floor and a stairwell to the right. The air inside was cool and dry and had no smell. Not dusty, not chemical, not stale, just neutral, like the air in a brand new building that hadn't had time to absorb anything yet. Ahead of me was a short hallway with 2 doors on the left, both closed. At the end of the hallway was a single overhead light fixture. The light was blue. The same blue. The pale, clean, clinical blue I'd seen on Bryden Road. It illuminated the hallway floor with that same underwater quality, the flat, even wash that made surfaces look like they were made of something different than what they were. I stood in that vestibule for perhaps 30 seconds. I could hear the laundromat's dryers through the left wall, a normal, mechanical hum. I could hear traffic on Miller Avenue through the glass door behind me. Everything outside the building was Columbus. Everything inside the building was something I didn't have a name for yet. I left. I got in my car. I drove to work. That night on Feed 9, the one I'd matched to Cleveland Avenue, I found the building, same facade, same beige brick, same recessed entrance. It was in the correct position relative to the commercial structures on either side, but on the feed it had signage. A small, professional sign above the door in a sans serif font, dark blue lettering on white. It read, Coralline Infrastructure Partners, Municipal Services Division. I need to talk about what happened next without dramatizing it, because the reality was more disorienting than anything I could exaggerate. Over the following week, the feeds changed, or rather, the relationship between the feeds and my daily life changed. It started with the figures. In 6 weeks of monitoring, I'd seen pedestrians on the feeds regularly, distant, anonymous, going about what looked like normal urban routines, walking, waiting for buses, entering and exiting buildings. They were part of the cityscape, no more notable than the parked cars or the fire hydrants. In week 8, I began seeing specific figures on specific feeds at specific times that corresponded to my own daily movements. Feed 15, my block of Bryden, showed a woman walking from a driveway to a parked car at 2:17 p.m. I left my driveway for work at approximately 2:15 p.m. every day. Feed 7, East Broad, showed a woman exiting a coffee shop at 2:31 p.m. I stopped at the Broad Street coffee shop on most workdays at approximately 2:30 p.m. Feed 9, Cleveland Avenue, showed a woman entering the beige brick building at 2:48 p.m. I had entered that building on a Tuesday morning. The time didn't match my visit, but the action did. The figures were distant. The camera angles were too wide to capture facial detail. But on Feed 15, 2 shifts in a row, I watched the figure walk to the car, and I could see the coat. A dark green wool coat with a wide collar. I own a dark green wool coat with a wide collar. I was wearing it when I drove to work. I watched the figure on Feed 15 open the car door and get in, and the car was a silver 4-door sedan, and I drive a silver 4-door sedan, and the figure drove east on Bryden exactly the way I drive east on Bryden, and I was watching this at 9 p.m., 6.5 hours after it had supposedly happened, on a feed showing a city I had been told was not Columbus. I didn't log it. I didn't know what category to select. Convergence. Field/feed didn't cover this. This wasn't a shared detail between two places. This was the same event in two places, and one of the places was my life. The next morning, I went to my usual coffee shop on East Broad. It was a small place. 6 tables, a short counter, the kind of neighborhood spot where the baristas know your order, but not your name. I'd been going there 3 or 4 days a week for over a year. I ordered my usual, a 12-ounce drip with room, and the barista, a young guy, early 20s, with a neck tattoo of a cardinal, handed me my cup and said, "Here you go, Lenora." Then he blinked. "Sorry, Nora. I don't know why I said that." I took the cup. "It's okay. I think I'm mixing you up with somebody. We get a lot of regulars." "No worries." I sat at my usual table. I drank my coffee. The name sat in my head the way a splinter sits under the skin. Not painful, but present. Lenora, close enough to be a slip of the tongue, close enough to be a variant, close enough to be the name of someone who does everything I do, at the same times, in the same places, but in a city called Elsa. That evening I did something I should have done during my first week. I looked up Coraline Infrastructure Partners, not a web search. I'd done that before the interview and found nothing beyond a generic one-page website with no employee directory, no client list, and no project portfolio. This time I went to the Ohio Secretary of State's business filing database and pulled the company's articles of incorporation. Coraline Infrastructure Partners, LLC, was registered in 2013. Registered agent, Dale R. Pressick. Principal office address, 1662 Harmon Avenue, Columbus, OH 43223. I opened Google Maps and searched for 1662 Harmon Avenue. No results. The address didn't resolve. Harmon Avenue existed. It was a short street on the south side, near Greenlawn. But the numbering on the available mapping data only went up to 1,400. I switched to the Franklin County Auditor's parcel viewer and searched by address. The parcel existed. 1662 Harmon Avenue. Parcel ID 010-04-3877. Zoned commercial. Last assessment, 2019. Assessed value, $340,000. Structure type, office, 2-story. Owner of record, City of Elsa, Ohio. I read it 3 times. I clicked on the parcel detail. The ownership record showed a transfer date of November 2012. Previous owner, Franklin County Land Bank. Transfer type, municipal acquisition. Acquiring entity, City of Elsa, Ohio. Population per municipal registration, 881,403. Year of incorporation, 1834. I searched the Secretary of State's database for City of Elsa. No results. I searched the Ohio Department of Development's municipal directory. No results. I searched the U.S. Census Bureau's database of incorporated places. No results. I searched every state and federal database I could think of that tracks municipal incorporations. And the City of Elsa, Ohio, population 881,403, appeared in exactly one place, the Franklin County Auditor's property ownership records, where it was listed as the owner of a parcel on a street whose numbering didn't reach that high on any map. I drove to the GPS coordinates listed for the parcel the next morning. I was standing in front of the building on North 4th Street, the building where I worked, the building with the dentist's office and the State Farm agent and the Coraline Infrastructure Partners suite on the second floor. The address on the building was 290 North 4th Street, not 1662 Harmon Avenue. The street was North 4th, not Harmon. Everything about the physical location contradicted the filing, except the GPS coordinates, which placed me exactly where the parcel said I should be. Either the auditor's coordinate data was wrong, or the building I worked in occupied a parcel that existed at two addresses simultaneously, one in Columbus and one in a city that didn't appear on any map. I went back to the monitoring room that evening and did something I hadn't done before. I looked at all 16 feeds at once, not scanning, not logging deviations, just looking at the total image. 16 fragments of a city. I tried to see them not as separate camera angles, but as pieces of a single place. And for the first time, I saw it. The city on the feeds was not a copy of Columbus. It was not an alternate version. It was not a simulation. It was a draft, a next version, a revision of the same geography, using most of the same materials, with targeted changes. A building added here, a setback adjusted there, a road widened, a bridge repositioned, a block rezoned. The changes weren't random. They weren't chaotic. They were improvements. The street grid on the feeds was more efficient. The building spacing allowed better light penetration. The residential neighborhoods had more consistent architectural language. The commercial corridors had better pedestrian infrastructure. Whatever Elsie was, someone, or something, had taken Columbus, studied it, and drawn a better version. Not radically better, not utopian, just optimized. The way a second draft of a city plan is cleaner than the first, because you've already made your mistakes. And the convergence points, the places where the feeds matched real Columbus, were not glitches. They were attachment points, places where the revision had successfully been grafted onto the original. The retaining wall on East Broad Street had a crack that was 3 inches longer on the feed because the feed was showing the wall as it would be in 6 months, more deteriorated, more in need of the replacement that the revised version had already planned for. The building on Miller Avenue that hadn't been there last month was there now because the revision had placed it there and the physical city had accepted the edit. The streetlights were the most visible signature of the transfer. When a light turned blue, it meant that piece of infrastructure had been swapped. The Columbus version was gone. The Elsa version was in its place. Same pole, same position, same electrical connection. But the light itself belonged to the other city. And every monitor who'd sat in this room had been part of the process, not as a victim, not as a sacrifice, as a calibration tool. The feeds needed human eyes that knew the real Columbus, that could compare it to the revision and unconsciously flag the differences. Every convergence entry we logged didn't just report an overlap, it confirmed one. It told the system, yes, this point has successfully transferred. The monitor's perception was the verification mechanism. Our attention was the stamp of approval. I was not watching the city. The city was watching through me. I thought about quitting. I want to be honest about that. I thought about it for the better part of 2 days. I thought about calling Dale and telling him I was done. I thought about driving to Dayton and not coming back. I thought about calling someone, a friend, a family member, a journalist, a city council member, and telling them what I'd found. But what had I found? A county auditor's record with an unusual ownership entry, a building that might have always been there, a streetlight that looked blue in my peripheral vision, a crack in a wall that was a few inches longer on a video feed than in person, a barista who stumbled over my name. I had nothing that would survive a conversation with a skeptical person. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered dissolved into ambiguity the moment I tried to describe it out loud. The horror of it. And I'm going to use that word because it's the right one, was that the process was designed to be unreportable. Each individual data point was explicable. Only the accumulation was damning, and the accumulation only existed in my head, organized by a pattern that I could not prove I hadn't invented. So I didn't quit. I went back to work. And on my next shift, the feeds showed me something I hadn't seen before. It was after 10 p.m., deep into the shift, when I noticed movement on feed 1. This was the commercial corridor feed, the one I'd never been able to match to a real Columbus location. A figure was walking down the center of the street, not the sidewalk. The street itself, moving with the unhurried pace of someone who knew no cars were coming. The figure approached a building on the left side of the frame, a 2-story structure I recognized from 6 weeks of watching, and entered through a door on the ground floor. Then the camera angle shifted. In 6 weeks, the cameras never moved. The feeds were fixed positions, static, bolted down. Feed 1 was showing me the same block it had showed me on my first day, from the same angle at the same elevation. And now it panned right. Slowly, smoothly, like someone was turning their head. It tracked across the building faces, past a parked delivery truck, past a fire escape, and settled on a new view. A section of the commercial block I'd never seen before. And in the center of this new frame was a storefront with a lit interior. Inside the storefront was a room, and inside the room was a desk with 16 monitors arranged in 2 rows of 8. And there was a woman sitting at the desk, looking at the screens. The image was clear enough to see her posture, her hair, dark, pulled back, the shape of her hands on the desk, the angle of her shoulders. She was leaning slightly forward, the way I lean forward when I'm comparing 2 feeds. I was looking at someone doing my job, in Elsa, in a monitoring room that was the mirror image of the one I was sitting in. As I watched, the woman on feed 1 turned in her chair. She turned toward the camera, not abruptly, slowly, the way you turn when you feel someone watching. And even at the distance, even through the compression of a digital feed, I could see her expression. She looked relieved, not scared, not surprised, relieved, the way you look when you've been waiting for something to happen, and it finally does. I looked away from the feed. I looked out the monitoring room door, through the front office, toward the hallway. The overhead fluorescent lights in the hall were the same institutional white they always were. I looked back at feed 1. The camera was still in its new position. The woman was still sitting at the desk. The monitors in her room were glowing. I looked at her screens. I could just barely resolve the images. They were showing a city. They were showing Columbus, my Columbus. I could see the Scioto. I could see the grid. I could see the amber streetlights. She was watching me. She had been watching me the entire time. Not my face, not my room. My city. The same way I'd been watching hers. We were each other's monitors, and the convergence was not a malfunction. It was the purpose. Two cities, watched by two women, each confirming the other's overlaps, each verifying the other's edits, each stamping the transfer as real. And the blue streetlights, the ones I saw on my streets, were the points where her city had successfully overwritten mine, and the amber lights she saw on her feeds, my city's lights, the Columbus lights, those were the points where mine still held. And every night the count shifted. One more blue, one fewer amber. I stood up from the chair. I walked to the window in the front office, the only window in the Coraline suite, and looked down at North 4th Street. It was almost 11 p.m. The street was quiet. Two cars at the intersection, a figure walking north on the far sidewalk. The streetlights on North 4th Street were blue. All of them, every one I could see, from the intersection to the next block and the block beyond that. Pale, clean, clinical blue. The pavement looked like the floor of a pool. The cars underneath them looked like they were resting on the bottom of something. I looked back at feed 1. The woman in the monitoring room was still turned toward the camera. I couldn't see her expression anymore because the image was slightly darker than it had been a minute ago. But she was still there, still watching. I looked at the other feeds 2 through 16. They were all showing Columbus, not else, not the revised version. My city, my Columbus. Every feed had shifted while I was looking at feed 1, and now all 16 screens showed streets I recognized. My commute, my neighborhood, my coffee shop, my grocery store, my laundromat, the stretch of East Broad where the retaining wall was cracked, the block of Bryden where I lived. The streetlights on the feeds were amber. The streetlights outside the window were blue. I was in the monitoring room. I was in a room with 16 screens. I was in a building at a GPS coordinate that the county auditor assigned to a parcel owned by the city of Elsa. And the woman on feed 1 was in a room with 16 screens, watching my city, with amber streetlights outside her window. I didn't know which room I was in. I stood there, between the window and the screens, and I tried to formulate the question precisely. Not, where am I? That question had a physical answer. I was standing on carpet tile in a room on the second floor of a building on North 4th Street. The question was, which North 4th Street? The one in Columbus, where the streetlights were amber and the city had been here since 1812, and every map and census and satellite image confirmed its existence. Or the one in Elsa, where the streetlights were blue and the city had been here since 1834, and no map or census or satellite image had ever acknowledged it, because it hadn't needed acknowledgement, because it was arriving the same way a second draft arrives, by overwriting the first. I clocked out at 11:32 p.m. I shut the monitoring application. I turned off the desk lamp. I walked through the front office, into the hallway, down the stairs, and out the front door onto North 4th Street. The streetlights were yellow, not blue, not amber. The ordinary sodium vapor yellow they'd been every night since I started this job. I stood on the sidewalk and looked up and down the block, and every light was the same color it had always been, and the pavement was the normal color, and the cars were the normal color, and the night air was cold and carried the ordinary smell of a Columbus November. Exhaust, damp concrete, dead leaves, I got in my car. I drove home. I counted the streetlights on Bryden Road. 44. I pulled into my driveway at 11:51 p.m. I turned off the engine. I looked at my house. It was my house. The porch I'd sat on through 2 summers. The front window with the crack in the frame I kept meaning to caulk. The door I'd painted dark red the week I moved in because the previous tenant had left it a green I couldn't live with. The porch light was blue, not the bulb. I'd put a standard warm white LED in that fixture in September. The light coming through the frosted glass cover was blue, the same blue, the pale, clean, expressionless blue that I'd been seeing for weeks in my periphery, on feeds, in a building on Miller Avenue, in the lights outside a window that might or might not have been mine. I sat in the car. The engine was off. The heater was off. The cold crept in through the cracked window I always left open. I looked at the blue light on my porch, and I thought about Glenn Borovich in Dayton, who had seen his own apartment on a feed and had moved 70 miles to get away from it, and whose streetlight count had been stable ever since. I thought about the 7 monitors before me, whose logs ended without commentary, who disappeared from the roll without exit notes. I thought about the woman on feed 1 who had turned in her chair and looked relieved. I thought about the note in the drawer. Count the streetlights on your way home. If the number changes, tell someone who doesn't work here. The number had changed. I hadn't told anyone who didn't work here. Glenn worked there once. The barista didn't count. I had no one to tell, and more than that, I had nothing to tell them that would survive the telling. The blue light on my porch was visible only to me and would probably be yellow by the time anyone else looked at it. I sat in the car for 8 minutes. Then I went inside. The house was mine. Everything was where I'd left it. The dishes in the drying rack, the coat on the hook by the door, the map on the kitchen table, my comparison map with its 5 matched feeds and 3 unmarked points, and the route drawn in red pen that connected them through the city I might or might not still be living in. I went to bed. I slept. I woke up the next morning at noon and made coffee and ate toast and checked my phone and got dressed for work. I drove to the office. The commute took 23 minutes. My commute had always taken 24 minutes. Every day for 8 weeks. I'm a creature of habit. I leave at the same time, drive the same route, hit the same lights. 24 minutes, give or take 30 seconds. I'd never timed it formally before. It was just the rhythm of the drive, the known duration, the felt length of a familiar trip. 23 minutes. 1 minute shorter. The distance between my house and the building on North 4th Street had decreased by 1 minute's worth of driving at my usual speed, and I did not know why, and I did not check. I noticed it the way you notice a picture frame that's slightly crooked, the kind of thing that registers in the part of your brain that monitors spatial consistency and then gets filed away because correcting it would mean admitting it moved. I didn't check. I parked. I went upstairs. I sat down in the monitoring room. The feeds were showing Elsie again. The revised city, the second draft, the version of Columbus that was arriving 1 streetlight at a time. Everything looked the way it had looked for 8 weeks. Fixed cameras, static angles. The commercial corridor on feed 1 was back to its original framing. No pan, no storefront monitoring room, no woman in a chair. Just the block I'd been watching since September, with its 2-story brick buildings and its slightly too cool amber light and its 60% occupancy pedestrian traffic. I logged 11 deviations that shift, all standard. Infrastructure, illumination, vehicular. I did not log any convergence entries. I did not look for the woman on feed 1. I did not check whether the streetlights outside the window were blue or yellow or any other color. I did my job. I clocked out. I drove home. 23 minutes. The next 4 shifts passed in a kind of deliberate stillness. I want to describe what that felt like because I think it's important for understanding what I did afterward. I was not calm. I was not at peace. I was performing the motions of a person who had decided not to investigate further, and the performance required my full concentration. In every shift, I sat in the chair and watched the feeds and logged deviations, and did not look too closely at anything. I did not compare the feeds to my commute. I did not photograph retaining walls. I did not count streetlights. I did not search county auditor databases or Secretary of State filings or municipal directories. I drove to work. I drove home. I did not time the drives. This was not denial. It was something more mechanical than that. A kind of voluntary narrowing, like adjusting the aperture on a camera so that only the center of the image is in focus and everything at the edges goes soft. I could feel the edges. I knew they were there. I knew that if I widened the aperture, if I counted one more streetlight, checked one more parcel record, drove down Miller Avenue to see if the building was still there, the picture would sharpen in ways I could not unsee. So I kept the aperture narrow. I did my job. 4 shifts. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. On Thursday, my last scheduled shift before a 2-day weekend, 2 things happened. The first was small. At 6:14 p.m., I was logging a deviation on feed 3. A traffic signal at an intersection I'd been watching for weeks had changed its cycle timing. Green phase shortened by what looked like 4 seconds. Standard entry. I typed the description, selected illumination from the drop-down, and moved to save. My hand stopped on the mouse. The deviation code drop-down was open. I looked at the bottom of the list. The final category, convergence, field/feed, was no longer the last item. Below it, there was a new entry. It hadn't been there yesterday. It hadn't been there for 8 weeks. Migration. Complete. I stared at it. I clicked on it. A text field opened, same as any other deviation category. But this one was pre-populated. In the description box in the system's default font was a single line of text. Monitor 8. Aylin, Nora. Transfer verification period concluding. Final assessment scheduled. I didn't type that. I hadn't entered my name into the system at any point during my employment. The logging application identified me by employee ID only. My name was in Coraline's HR file somewhere, presumably, but it had no reason to appear in the deviation logging software. I deleted the text. I closed the drop-down. I selected illumination for my traffic signal entry and saved it. My hands were steady. My breathing was normal. The aperture was holding, but the edges were bleeding in. The second thing happened at 10:47 p.m. I was on my last scan of the night. The slow sweep from feed 1 to feed 16 that I did in the final hour to catch anything I'd missed. I was on feed 12. Glenn's old building, the East Long Street match. I'd been watching this feed all night, and it had been unremarkable. Parked cars, empty sidewalk, the building sitting there with its extra half-story that the real version didn't have. A light came on in the 3rd-floor window. second from the left, Glenn's old unit. And then a figure appeared in the window, just a silhouette, backlit by the interior light, standing close to the glass. The figure raised one hand and placed it flat against the window, and then it waved. Not frantically, not urgently. A slow, deliberate wave. The kind of wave you give to someone you know is watching. The kind of wave that says, "I see you seeing me." The figure held the wave for about 5 seconds. Then the hand dropped. The silhouette stepped back from the window. The light stayed on. I stared at feed 12 for the remaining 43 minutes of my shift. The light in the window stayed on. No further movement. No further figures. Just a lit window in a building that belonged to a man who'd fled to Dayton 5 months ago, in a city that didn't exist on any map, waving at a woman who was supposed to be watching but not understanding. I clocked out. I drove home. I did not count the streetlights. The commute took 22 minutes. Friday, day off. I woke up at 10 a.m. and lay in bed for a long time, looking at the ceiling, listening to the house. My house made the usual sounds. The furnace cycling, the refrigerator compressor humming, the occasional creak of the old wood frame settling against the cold. Normal sounds. Verified sounds. I knew what each one was because I'd lived with them for 2 years. At 11:30 I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with my comparison map. I hadn't looked at it in 5 days. The red route was still there, connecting the 5 matched feeds through the city. The 3 unmarked points were still circled in pencil. I picked up my phone and called Glenn Borovich. He answered on the second ring. "Nora, how did you know it was me? You're the only person who has this number who would call on a Friday morning. What happened?" I told him about the feeds switching to Columbus. I told him about the woman in the monitoring room on feed 1. I told him about the blue streetlights on North 4th Street and the blue porch light at my house. I told him about the migration, complete category, and the pre-populated text with my name. I told him about the wave. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. I could hear him breathing. I could hear what sounded like a television in another room, tuned to something with a laugh track. "The wave is new," he said finally. "That didn't happen to me." "What does that mean?" "It means you're further along than I was. I left during the overlap phase. You're past that. You're in. I don't know what to call it. Confirmation, acknowledgement. It knows you can see it, and it's not hiding anymore. It's a city, Glenn. Cities don't wave. People in cities wave, and the people in that city know who you are. They've been watching you as long as you've been watching them. Longer, probably. The monitoring job. The whole thing with the feeds. You understand that's not surveillance, right? It's not about watching. It's about seeing. The city needs to be seen by someone who understands geographic space, someone who can compare it to the original and confirm the differences are real. That's what the monitor does. You're not a security guard. You're a witness. You make the transfer real by observing it. And if I stop observing, then someone else sits in the chair. There's always a monitor 8. I was monitor 7. You're monitor 8. There'll be a 9. What if no one sits in the chair? Glenn didn't answer that question. Instead, he said, "How long is your commute now?" "I don't know. I haven't been timing it." "Time it tonight." "I'm off tonight." Then time it tomorrow, and count the streetlights, and check your mail. My mail? Your physical mail, your mailbox. Check it tomorrow. He hung up. I sat at the kitchen table and drank cold coffee and looked at the map and didn't do anything for 2 hours. Saturday, still off. I spent the morning cleaning the house. Not because it needed it, but because cleaning is the thing I do when I need to feel like the space I occupy is under my control. I scrubbed the kitchen. I vacuumed the living room. I organized the hall closet. I wiped down every surface in the bathroom. I moved through the rooms with the focused energy of someone who is definitely not avoiding a mailbox. At 2 p.m., I went out to the porch. The porch light was off. I'd unscrewed the bulb on Thursday night after I'd gotten home and seen it glowing blue. I'd told myself I was replacing it with a new one. I hadn't bought a new one. I opened the mailbox. There was one piece of mail inside, not in the stack that the carrier had delivered. I'd collected that on Thursday, and it had been the usual assortment of credit card offers and utility bills. This was a single envelope, white, business size, with a printed address label. It was addressed to Lenora Elin. My correct house number, Bryden Road, Columbus, Ohio, 43205. The return address was City of Else Department of Municipal Services, 1662, Harmon Avenue, Else, Ohio, 43223. The zip code was the same as the Columbus zip for the south side, Harmon Avenue. The street from Coraline's corporate filing, the street that didn't reach that address in Columbus's numbering system. I stood on the porch, holding the envelope. The paper was high quality, heavier than standard mail with a slight texture. The printing was clean and professional. It looked exactly like the kind of correspondence you'd receive from a municipal services department. I've received hundreds of similar envelopes from county auditors, zoning boards, public works departments. This was indistinguishable from any of them. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, letterhead at the top, City of Else, Department of Municipal Services, with a logo that looked like a simplified city grid, intersecting lines forming a pattern that, I realized after staring at it for 10 seconds, was a simplified map of central Columbus, rotated 15 degrees clockwise. The letter read, Dear Ms. Elin, this letter confirms that your residential address has been successfully verified through the Municipal Visual Compliance Program and is scheduled for migration to the ELSA Municipal Services Grid. Your address will retain its current designation, Bryden Road, and will be serviced under LC Residential Zone E7, effective upon completion of the current assessment period. No action is required on your part. Utility services, waste collection, and emergency response coverage will transfer automatically. Your property tax assessment will be conducted under LSA valuation standards, which may differ from your current Franklin County assessment. You will receive updated documentation within 30 days of completed migration. We appreciate your participation in the Compliance Monitoring Program and welcome you as a resident of ELSA. Sincerely, Office of the City Manager, City of Else, Ohio. There was no signature, no name, no phone number, no website. Just the letterhead and the text and the logo with its rotated grid. I read it 3 times. I folded it. I put it back in the envelope. I went inside and put the envelope in the kitchen drawer, the same drawer where I keep takeout menus and spare batteries and the pen I use to write grocery lists. I put it there because I didn't know where else to put it. It was a piece of mail. It went in the drawer where mail goes. I stood in the kitchen. The house was clean. The house was mine. The furnace was running. The refrigerator was humming. Everything was in its correct place. The commute was 1 minute shorter than it had been 3 weeks ago, and I knew it was probably shorter still, and I was not going to time it to find out. The streetlight count on Bryden had been 44 on my last count, and I was not going to count again. The porch light was unscrewed and dark, and I was not going to replace the bulb. The letter was in the drawer, and I was not going to read it a fourth time. I was making choices. That's what I told myself. I was exercising the agency of a person who can decide what to look at and what to leave alone. I was closing the aperture, tightening the focus, keeping only the center of the image sharp. But here is what I understood, standing in my kitchen on a Saturday afternoon in November, and what I haven't been able to stop understanding since. The aperture doesn't matter. The edges don't care whether I look at them. The streetlights change color whether I count them or not. The commute shortens whether I time it or not. The letter arrived whether I opened the mailbox or not. The city is arriving whether I watch the feeds or not. My observation was never the cause. It was only ever the confirmation. The migration doesn't need my permission. It needs my address. And it has my address. It's printed on the envelope. It's in the logging system under my name. It's in the county auditor's database on a parcel that exists at 2 addresses simultaneously. It's in the deviation logs I filed for 8 weeks, each convergence entry a quiet yes, a witnessed notarization of the transfer. Every time I logged a shared crack, a matched building, a duplicated streetlight, I was signing off on the edit. I was approving the revision. I was the proofreader who checks the second draft against the first and marks it clean. Sunday. I drove to work. The commute took 21 minutes. I timed it. I don't know why I timed it after spending 5 days refusing to. Something had shifted, not courage. More like the recognition that refusing to measure a thing doesn't keep the thing from changing. It just means you don't know the number. And I am, by training and by temperament, a person who needs to know the number. 21 minutes, down from 24 on my first day. 3 minutes erased from a route I drive 5 nights a week. I drove the same speed. I hit the same lights. The route was the same. The distance was not. I parked in my usual spot on North 4th. I walked into the building, up the stairs, past the dentist's office, past the State Farm office, dark now because it was Sunday, into the Coraline suite, into the monitoring room. The feeds were on. All 16 screens active. I sat down and reached for the mouse to open the logging application, and then stopped. Feed 1 was showing my kitchen. Not a kitchen that looked like mine. My kitchen table with the comparison map still spread across it. My coffee mug on the counter where I'd left it that morning. The blue one with the chipped rim that I'd bought at a thrift store on Parsons Avenue 2 years ago. The dish rack with the plates I'd washed on Saturday. The drawer where I'd put the letter. The camera angle was from above and to the right, approximately where the ceiling met the east wall. There was no camera in my kitchen. I do not have any surveillance equipment in my home. There is no smart device in that room. The image was being shown to me on a feed that was supposed to originate in a city called Elsa, and it was showing me the inside of my house, and every detail was correct, down to the crack in the baseboard under the window that I'd been meaning to fill since last winter. I looked at feeds 2 through 16. They were all showing rooms, not city streets, not urban infrastructure. Rooms. My living room on feed 2, my bedroom on feed 3, my bathroom on feed 4, my hallway on feed 5, my porch, seen from inside, on feed 6, my basement, a space I barely used, mostly storage, on feed 7. Feeds 8 through 16 showed rooms I didn't recognize. An office with a different desk than the one I sat at. A kitchen that wasn't mine but had similar dimensions. A bedroom with a window that overlooked a street lit in blue. A hallway with the same proportions as mine but with different flooring. A living room with furniture I didn't own arranged in the spatial pattern I would have chosen if I'd been furnishing the room from scratch. My home on feeds 1 through 7. A different home. A parallel home, an optimized home, a second draft home. On feeds 8 through 16, 1 for 1, room for room. I sat there for a very long time. At 9 p.m. I opened the logging application. The migration. Complete category was still in the drop-down. I clicked on it. The description field was pre-populated again, but with different text this time. Monitor 8, Elin, Nora. Final assessment complete. Migration schedule confirmed. Welcome packet delivered November 16th. Residential Zone E7 active. No further monitoring required. The date on the welcome packet, November 16th, was last Saturday, the day I'd found the letter in my mailbox. I closed the application. I turned off the monitors one by one, starting with feed 16 and working backward. When I turned off feed 1, the image of my kitchen disappeared, and the screen went black, and I was sitting in a dark room on the second floor of a building that existed at 2 addresses in 2 cities. I left the monitoring room. I left the building. I stood on North 4th Street and looked up at the streetlights. They were blue, all of them, not in my periphery, not in my peripheral vision when I looked away and let my focus go soft. Directly, unambiguously. The streetlights on North 4th Street were blue, and the light they cast was the light I had been watching on 16 screens for 2 months. The clean, cool, clinical light that turns pavement into something else and makes parked cars look like they're resting on the bottom of a shallow, still body of water. I looked south toward High Street. Blue. I looked north toward the convention center. Blue. I got in my car and drove home. Every streetlight on my route was blue. Every single one. Not flickering, not shifting, not hiding in my periphery. Solid, stable, pale blue, lining the streets like markers delineating the boundary of a city that had finished arriving. The commute took 19 minutes. I pulled into my driveway. My porch light was on. I had unscrewed the bulb 2 days ago. The bulb was screwed in. The light was on. It was blue. I went inside. The house was mine. The coffee mug was where I'd left it. The map was on the table. The dishes were in the rack. The crack in the baseboard was under the window. Everything was correct. Everything was correct. And the light coming through the windows from the streetlights outside was blue, and the house was mine, and the house wasn't Elsa, and there was no longer a difference between those 2 things. I didn't go back to the monitoring room. Not because I quit. I didn't call Dale. I didn't send a resignation email. I didn't return the keycard. I just didn't go back, and no one contacted me about it. No call, no email, no text. My final paycheck arrived by direct deposit the following Friday, a full week's pay, including Sunday, even though I'd walked out mid-shift. The pay stub listed the employer as Coraline Infrastructure Partners, and the payment amount was correct to the cent. The following Tuesday, a second piece of mail arrived. Same white envelope, same printed label, same return address. City of Elza, Department of Municipal Services, 1662 Harmon Avenue. This one was addressed to Nora Elin, not Lenora. Nora. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a residential utility services confirmation, the kind of form you receive when you move to a new municipality and your water, electric, and waste collection accounts are activated. Account holder, Elin, Nora. Service address, my address on Bryden Road. Municipality, City of Elza, Ohio. Service start date, November 19th, 2024. November 19th was the Sunday I'd driven to work for the last time. I put the form in the kitchen drawer with the welcome letter. I closed the drawer. That was 5 months ago. I'm recording this on a Sunday afternoon in April. I'm sitting at my kitchen table. The comparison map is gone. I threw it away in December, not because I'd stopped believing it, but because there was nothing left to compare. The coffee mug is on the counter. The crack in the baseboard is still there. The furnace is running. The house sounds the way a house sounds. I still live on Bryden Road. I still shop at the same grocery store. I still get coffee at the place on East Broad where the barista with the cardinal tattoo works. He calls me Nora now. He's never slipped again. The streetlights are blue, all of them. Every streetlight I can see from my house, on my street, on every street I drive. Blue. The pale, clean blue that I first noticed in my peripheral vision on a Tuesday night in November, back when I thought it was a trick of tired eyes. No one else seems to notice. I've never heard anyone comment on it. Not a neighbor, not a cashier, not a stranger on the sidewalk. The light falls on their faces and their coats and their dogs and their strollers, and they walk through it the way you walk through any light, without looking up. I don't know if they can't see it, or if they've always seen it. I don't know if the city I'm living in is the one that was here when I moved in, or the one that arrived while I was watching. I don't know if there's a difference anymore. That's the thing I keep coming back to. If a city replaces another city, block by block, light by light, address by address, and the people remain, and the streets remain, and the names remain, and the coffee is the same, and the rent is due on the same day, and the mail arrives at the same time, then what exactly was lost? What is the thing I should be mourning? The 3 minutes of commute time that disappeared? The amber color of a streetlight that no one but me remembers? The version of Columbus that existed before the revision, that was maybe a little less efficient, a little less optimized, a little more broken in these specific ways that made it mine? I don't know. I put the utility confirmation in the drawer. I drive to the grocery store. The commute to everything is shorter than it used to be, because the city is more efficient now, because the second draft is always cleaner than the first. Last week I saw a job listing on the same employment board where I'd found the Coraline posting. Same site, same plain-looking aggregator layout. The listing was titled Municipal Visual Compliance Monitor, Columbus Metro Area, Evening Shift, 5 nights per week, $31.50 an hour, Monitor 9. I thought about calling Glenn. I thought about finding the listings application link and somehow warning whoever clicked on it. I thought about driving to the building on North 4th Street and checking whether the Coraline suite was still there, between the dentist and the State Farm agent, with its 2 rooms and its 16 screens and its drop-down menu with a category at the bottom that no new hire would understand until it was too late to matter. I didn't do any of those things. I closed the browser tab. I made dinner. I went to bed. The porch light was on when I got up this morning. I hadn't turned it on. It was blue, the way it's been blue since November, the way every light is blue now. I stood in the doorway and looked out at Bryden Road, and the blue light fell on the sidewalk and on the parked cars and on the tree in the front yard that's just starting to bud because it's April, which means I've been here through an entire winter and into a spring, in a city that arrived without announcement and settled over the one I knew like a transparency laid on top of a drawing. Same shapes, cleaner lines, different light. Somewhere, I think, there's a woman in a monitoring room watching 16 feeds. She's looking at my street. She's logging deviations. She's noticing that the crack in a retaining wall on her feed is 3 inches longer than the one she passes on her commute. She's wondering about convergence. She's about to open the archive and find 7 sets of logs that end in silence and an 8th. Mine. That ends with a category she's never seen before. She'll count the streetlights on her way home. The number will change. She'll tell herself it doesn't matter. The city is patient. The city has a posting to fill. The city has always had a posting to fill. And the lights are so blue.